good camera. It is. I mean, I'm very happy with the result, but it's just like it does this thing, and it just annoys the crap out of me.
And then nothing you can do about it. It's like, yeah, welcome to your AI assisted technology. I'm doing this because you want me to, not because I'm doing this because I can, not because you want me to. Yeah.
All right, Toby. So it's been about a half a year, I think, since we talked, more or less. Since then, quite a lot has happened, and sometimes it's hard to just figure out where do we start now. I mean, you and I talk in between, obviously, so the folks know this. We send each other stuff and like, look at this, look at that, and like, can you believe this? There's been quite a few of those over the last few months. But what I wanted to do is just for the audience, Toby has a background in military intelligence and many other things, survival, urban survival, a bunch of other stuff. But I like to pick his brain onto what's going on the geopolitical scene, and we always try to, if at all possible, bring it to a more human level as opposed to going bird's eye view. But like what can you do as an average citizen like you and I? Just what can you do when you see all these chaotic things happening in the world? So that's kind of the idea. I don't know. I have some thoughts, and like I just said, where what I would like to cover in the main segment and in the bonus part, the second part over on Patreon. But anywhere you want to start.
Yeah, so just super quickly, if it's okay, Wim, it's like I always appreciate the introduction, and we're talking more frequently now, and that's revealing in and of itself. Because it was like there was the first podcast, and it was like 2 years we did one, then 1 year, and now 6 months, and it's sort of like, oh, like we need to talk about stuff. But you mentioned very kindly about sort of military intelligence background. I just want to talk on that specifically because that's one of those. It's such a sort of weird ethereal sort of title that people are like, oh, what does that actually mean? And so I just want to go right back to some fundamental parts of like when we started training as intelligentsias on the definition of what is intelligence. You know, it's a PowerPoint slide for it in like the Defense Academy. Like, what is intelligence? And the simple answer is information that's been subject to assessment. That's it. That's the definition of intelligence. So all we're doing really is working with the same information that's available to everybody out there. We're just spending a little bit longer comparing our notes, thinking about that, and putting it in a framework and a context and sort of analyzing it. That's the only difference. So people use this word intelligence. It's been hijacked, and there's definitely an absence of it in a lot of parts of the planet now. But it's just sort of giving yourself time to actually weigh that up. And then that's the second part I want to talk about intelligence, and that's basically source value or quality of intelligence, quality of information. And the formal system is letters and numbers related. So if you've got, a source, which is normally classified, so you'll never reveal your source, it's just like a journalist, but someone will say, like, what's the quality, what's the rating of your source? And the premium source is A1. So A1 grade intelligence is basically the best grade intelligence that exists. But here's something to understand without getting into too much detail. You cannot take a singular source and grade it as A1. To be A1, it basically means multiple different delineated sources have confirmed exactly the same thing. As soon as it gets a bit grey or ambiguous or delineated or too close together, it goes down the BCCs and the 1, 2, 3s. And so whenever you're giving an intelligence report, you will actually put a source weighting on it in terms of the quality or the credibility, I should say, the source credibility of that intelligence. So I just want to mention that because some people are going to be going around saying this is A1 or claiming this is A1. And quite simply, if your mate down the pub told it you one time when you were drunk, the one thing it can't be is A1 grade intelligence. Okay, so lesson over. Everything we're going to talk about is quite speculative from our viewpoints. But what's interesting for me is when I'm getting different information points, different data points, different sources, different thoughts, but then talking to someone like yourself that lives in a different place, does a different job, has a different background, a different network, a different social circle, and we land very, very close to each other, that's interesting for me. Because it's like, right, I can start to distill that down and say, if I've got 2 or 3 people in my sphere that are all in different locations, looking at different things with different influences, but we're all getting our assessments very close to each other without it being that singular repetitive sound bite, so we're not regurgitating the exact same thing that the media said, but we've kind of come to an assessment. that's when we start to get that distillation of truth of like, there's probably something a little bit in here worthwhile digging on. So always interested to compare notes as we chat as we go along. I just wanted to give that background as we get into some more detailed things, because we're obviously going to a little bit rest on our laurels and pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we did tell you like a year ago, 2 years ago on this, and we were sort of right. And I want, for the benefit of the listener, because we're looking for the everyday person on how they can interpret and use this to better affect their decision making, is to build a little bit of confidence about what we're saying. I think being transparent on that we're never going to complain A1 source quality, but just kind of understand the process we're coming through to have these conversations and say, with a degree of certainty or not, this is my analysis or my assessment going forward. So hopefully everyone's happy with that.
No, that's great, and it's also something I wanted to touch on. I've had this discussion many times with people over the past 3.5 years, ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. In that this concept, you and I talked about this before, is yes, obviously the Russian state media offers propaganda to its people, obviously, and then I literally asked somebody that recently, is like, so do you think that our media does the same thing to us? And it refused to answer, refused to accept that. Said no, I count on the professionalism of our journalists to give correct information, yada yada yada. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you then. I mean, if you cannot even, and I can cite many examples. So we can start with the Ghost of Kiev and all that kind of stuff. The numbers of KIAs that Zelensky gave, I think last year or the year before, which was ludicrous. And there's plenty of other things that, if you just stop and think about it, outside of the ideological bubble that you might have, you'll notice that there's no way this is true. There's absolutely no way this is true. So where do you get information? And then I share some of the information, and then people are like, yeah, but how can you trust this? Why do you think that this is not propaganda? And that's an excellent question. And we get to what you said. It's like, right, so I'll give the example of there's plenty of military mappers. So if people don't know what it is, look up military mapper Ukraine online, you'll find it. And it's people who basically have what looks like some version of Google Maps, and they color in where's the front, where is this happening, where is that happening, where's Ukraine, who is holding which position, and they give a lot of commentary on it and so on. You will find the like Deep State, the basically official Ukrainian military mapper, more or less, that obviously gives a pro-Ukraine standpoint, and that's perfectly fine. And then you will find those that are clearly on the side of Russia, and then you find those who are, more to the center, more a little bit to the left or the right or whatever. But you can actually find that information. So which one do you trust? You don't trust any of them just out of the gate. I mean, like you said, you have to confirm this in multiple ways. So what do? Well, it's going to take work. It's going to take effort. It's not something that you can just switch off your brain and just wait for the information to come to you. You're going to have to work at it. So what can you do? Well, simply look at, for instance, I've been following the front line in the Pokrovsk area quite closely, because it's one of the key areas on the front, and then if Pokrovsk falls, and then you've got Kupiansk, and you've got all the other things that are connected basically. And you can see, because the battle's been raging for a few months quite intensely, you can see which mapper is going to give which progress report, in what kind of slant, what kind of explanation do they give. Sometimes you see certain say like, oh, Ukraine just captured this territory again from the Russians, and there's a big claim there, and then two other mappers say the opposite. Okay, give it a week or two. See how the original mapper who's claimed the victory there for Ukraine, see if it changes or not. And if all of a sudden it changes, sometimes quietly maybe, not necessarily admitting that they made a mistake or did that on purpose, and so on. So you can, if you look at the timeline, you can see that there's an evolution there, and you'll see that certain people have clearly a bias towards one way or the other. But if you look at the overall picture, something will become clear. And you can get a much better understanding of what's going on with the front line and what is actually happening. If, let's say, 6 months ago, a pro-Ukraine mapper said, okay, this is what's going on in Dnipropetrovsk, for instance, and you see now that, and then back then the pro-Russian guys said the opposite, Fast forward 6 months, go look back again. See what happens. See how the map is colored over there. And if you see that, actually it's colored in favor of the Russians, right? You know that most likely that is true, as the Ukrainian mapper adjusted that area, and a lot of stuff might have happened in the meantime. The point is that you're going to have to do a little bit of work to vet your own sources and never just blindly believe them. If it's mainstream media, if it's alternative media, if it's a journalist you follow, like I follow a bunch of people that I think have interesting things to say, but you always start with this from this place of a healthy dose of skepticism, understanding the bias of whatever source you're looking at and what the limitations are. Like you say, you grade them on a certain quality level. Like, okay, this is like A1, and this is total crap, and I don't believe a word the guy's saying. So it takes work, and I'm not gonna spend all the time. Like I said, I prepared for our talk here and looking at all the things that I saved about things that happened in the war. It's just too much to list. So for anything we say, you're gonna have to take our word for it. And if you don't believe it, that's fine. But start looking for it. You'll find it. If you want to find some of the stuff that you're not gonna say that goes against the grain, goes against the mainstream narrative, you will be able to find it and then go through the process of vetting the sources, like I just explained. Draw your own conclusions, and that's fine. That's it.
Awesome. So just tap into that. You sort of posed the question that you answered yourself there. Is like, what sources do I look at for news right now? And what I've found, basically, definitely within the last 12 months, like the propaganda levels are just insane across the board. Like I just find mainstream media now debilitating. I said fatiguing 12 months ago. Now it's just like that propaganda just has an effect that it's just so debilitating to kind of even be around it. So I've stepped off it massively, and what I've intentionally done is taken away all of that granularity investigation. Like you said, kind of literally looking at the kind of squiggly lines as front lines on the map and daily progress in that, and just said, I just want the big picture now. I just want the meta kind of stuff, that big trend analysis. So less how is the Ukrainian front looking this week to last week, to like just overall, how is the war in Ukraine going? Because actually the daily twos and fro's of like cats crossing the road in Ukraine isn't going to affect me. But the general drift of what next is. And so I'm dabbling in media way less. And what I'm doing is heavily filtering my viewpoint. So if I'm watching a news report, it's because I really want to see the footage, and I'll focus on the footage instead of the commentary. So I've been watching quite a few documentaries for various reasons about Ukrainian medics, especially the combat medics, especially the rehabilitation and recovery process as they get sort of brought out and put back in again. And listening to their testimonials, and more importantly, listening to their feelings, quite simply, in these interviews. And then looking at the footage. It's like, if I'm looking at an artillery piece that's firing, what shelter is it actually in? Like, how are they operationally deploying that? Not they're winning. You know, that shot was successful. Here's some stock footage of a shell landing, and we're going to say that's the neutralizing position. That I'm not so interested in. What I'm interested in is what's in what placement, predicament, and condition, and how are the guys and girls around it? Like, where's the fatigue level at? Because as we know, you know, not only from the sort of conflict background, but other things, 85% of communication is non-verbal. So you'll learn a lot by looking at people when they're talking, not just hearing what they're saying. So even if you don't know the language, you know, there's a number of countries you can go to, you don't speak the language, and you'll still figure out how much trouble you're in or not, just by how the body language is going. And those that don't fit the baseline, that's where you have to learn the body language more than the language to just understand, you know, is it particularly flamboyant and that's how people speak, or are you properly in the shit right now, without digressing. And so what I've done on all the big ticket issues, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, Iran, I'm not digging into the detail. It just, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't need to. I'm just looking at that sort of big picture stuff and sort of saying, I've got enough people out there that if something went seriously sideways, I'd probably know about it. You know, someone would be like on an app giving it, have you seen this? which is exactly what happened with Charlie Kirk. You know, I woke up to like 3 or 4 messages to be like, America's done. It was like, oh, okay, what? You know, 5 in the morning, I just woke up. I can't even, like, what is it? Is it nuclear or what? We'll get on to that in a minute. And that's the great thing. Like, if you've got that network of people you trust, it just lets you put a bunch of stuff down and fit into the puzzle to be like, okay, well, I'll kind of tell my guys, I'm over here doing this now, guys. If you just like today, if you want to have a conversation about this, I'm your guy. Like, let me know, and I'll come to you about this. So Canada, for example, all sorts of really interesting things happening. Canada's off everybody's radar, but like for what Britain's doing to Europe, Canada's doing to the continental sort of side of things in terms of like where their governance has gone. I don't have time to look, but I've got 2 people in Canada that are just like super all over it. And if ever I want to know anything, I can just drop them a line and be like, how bad has it got since I last spoke to you and why? You know, and they'll normally just like start belt feeding me like links of like, see this, and this is what it means. And so that's what you've got to do. That's good intelligence gathering, is having that network of people around you. So I think when I talk about networks, it's less about BBC, MSNBC, CNN networks, and more just the people around me, and increasingly hitting that criminal baseline. What are the criminals doing? Because they like to move in the shadows, and when they start to move in the light, now, are they moving in the light, or has actually the shadows moved? And I think that's something that's very interesting for where you're at, and certainly in Sweden, the criminal activity is becoming much, much more mainstream, which means that criminals are much more emboldened to say, we're doing this with impunity, because there isn't a mechanism. The checks and balances have gone now. Like nature abhors a vacuum. We feel very happy to start taking this space and taking this ground, because we can, because ultimately it's just a power play. And so that's where I spent more of my granular effort, is sort of that homegrown, you know, in the towns and cities around me, what's happening in the criminal profile, which has raised significantly, and the public discussion around that. Sweden's policy for years was just to deny there was a problem. You know, there was no no-go zones, there was no restricted areas, there was no issues with any of these key things. And now every day in the media, that's all you see, like another hand grenade attack, another rape, another this. What are we going to do? Hands wringing, clutching pearls. What are we going to do? Yeah, what are we going to do, guys? It's a great question, you know. But the problem's now being firmly acknowledged, and that in and of itself is interesting.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that. When we get to the what's going to happen to the European Union. I posted this recently on my Facebook page a few days ago, that we at the 70th shooting in Brussels this year now. We are on our way to break our own all-time high record. And there's no stopping. It's just at this stage right now, I think there's a shooting every 4 days, and by the end of the year we'll be at a shooting, if this keeps going, every 3 to every 2 days. This is unheard of in Brussels, capital of Europe. A few years ago, this was just like the exception was that there was a shooting, and now it's just completely normalized. And like you said, the criminal element is very much active. I mean, the wife of a client of mine works in a pharmacy, and this is relatively far outside of Brussels. And 3 teenagers pulled up at closing time put a gun to their heads and put them on the ground and stole a whopping 210 euros, divided by 3. But there's not much left of it, because they were so smart to do that when there was a police intervention down the road and cops nabbed them. And they're all minors, so they're going to get a slap on the wrist. But this was unheard of only a few years ago. There were robberies, but not like this. Now, and that's something that's going to happen more and more for a variety of reasons, and I'll get to that when we talk more about the EU. But it's clearly something that, like you said, we can look at a bird's eye view, what's going on in Ukraine and so on, and how it influences us, obviously, because it has a direct impact, even if we're not on the front line here in Belgium. That's not it. But what is going on there, what European leaders are doing, and so on, is having a direct impact on our daily lives and our future and that of our children. So that's why it matters. And if you stick to ideology, you don't get much further than Russia bad, Ukraine good, we're done. Like, okay, I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I am saying, like, yes, how does that help you in any other way than patting yourself on the back that I said I'm a good person because I said that. It's like, you know, with what's coming down the line, I think it's better to be focused on something else. Um, if it's okay with you, I'll just go over some stuff. So this is just covering a little bit from where we left off last time.
Mm-hmm.
So for all intents and purposes, I would say that the Ukrainian military is basically falling apart. They've got massive defections. You've got desertion, which is incredibly difficult problem to tackle. They are basically running out of people to send to the front. I think the lowest age is 25-year-old they're sending, but there's, if I'm not mistaken, a law passed that volunteers from 18 years old can actually join. Volunteers, quote unquote, because recruitment is a little bit interesting there. 60-year-olds can also be sent to the army now in Ukraine. So why would a government do that? Send 60-year-olds to go join the army while it's in the middle of the war? Not because they have an abundance of troops to share, clearly. So that's going on, but looks like it's going pretty bad. All the information that I have seen from my perspective is very clear, is that, like you said 2 years ago, the war was lost 2 years ago. The big offensive failed, and now it's just a matter of mopping up. There's a big problem with perception and narrative in mainstream media when you say that, because people get upset, and then we get to this conundrum. And I'm like, look, a lot of people say, like, well, Russia is hardly able to conquer only a few percentages of land of Ukraine, so they're poor army. People like what is it? Not Witkov, but the other one, the envoy of the U.S. to Russia, the general. I'm blank on his name. He said, like, it's a poor army. They can't do anything. They can't capture any ground. Trump calls them a paper tiger. Like I say, you can say that, but then you can't say that the entire European continent is in danger, because if they can hardly conquer a little bit of Ukraine, when the Ukrainians are fighting basically all by themselves, more or less, obviously, then there's no danger that they're going to roll into Brussels with tanks anytime soon. So that's nonsense. Or you're going to have to admit that something else is going on, because the Ukrainians are clearly not capable of kicking them out of their country. So what's going on? Well, we have a war of attrition. Putin recently just said that. We just wait for them to send more troops and then we kill them. So he is accomplishing one of his very explicitly stated goals, which is destroying the Ukrainian military. That is happening as we speak. There's basically a genocide going on over there, which everybody's focused on Gaza, but that's what's happening to Ukraine, and everybody is cheering it on, because Ukrainian men are sent to be slaughtered for 3.5 years now, and it's not getting better. There is, I'm just going over my list a little bit more. There's a big problem that the US basically said, like, it's a European problem now. Trump literally said, like, okay, we're just going to sell weapons to NATO. NATO can choose how to give them to Ukraine. We're not involved. So they're withdrawing. They withdrew funds from Baltic states, promises for military equipment and so on. That you're not getting that. And at the same time as the US is withdrawing, obviously Europe is panicking, because European leaders have talked themselves into, like, we have to support this Ukraine, this war until the last Ukrainian, basically. Every self-imposed red line that the West has made, we crossed it. I remember a time when Biden said that sending F-16s would be World War III. What are we doing? And now we're actually talking about Tomahawks. Sending Tomahawks to Ukraine to strike Russia, deep into Russia. Now, what people need to understand is that the Tomahawk missiles actually are nuclearly capable. So once a Tomahawk is in the air and Russia detects that that's flying right at them, why would they assume it's not going to be nuclear? It's going to be fine. When we have Zelensky, who actually said that, well, Ukraine should have nuclear weapons. That's the solution. So the way that this mutually assured destruction doctrine works is that you have to take it seriously. So if the US actually does send the Tomahawks, which is debatable because the way that Trump sets it up is that yes, we're going to send them, but actually it's going to be NATO that sends them. Who can send them in NATO to Ukraine? From it is my understanding that the most likely candidate is going to be the Netherlands, who apparently have Tomahawks coming in, but that's not going to happen anytime soon, if I'm not mistaken. At best next year. Then you're going to need a way to deploy them, which is typically going to be some sort of airplane, ship, or a land-based structure. It's going to have to be land-based because if they send an airplane, that's World War III. It's going to have to be a NATO airplane, an American one. If a ship, which ship is going to send? You're going to send a destroyer to launch a Tomahawk missile at Russia. Not bloody likely. You've got World War III again, so it's going to have to be land-based. And my understanding is that that platform, the Typhoon platform, there's only 2 of them made. So when is they going to be delivered? Who's going to be trained to do that, and so on? And I'm not even discussing the whole aspect of actually launching that missile has to be done by the U.S. military, like actively doing it by the military, American military, pushing the buttons, doing all that kind of stuff, which again is World War III. So it's not anytime soon going to happen. It's an empty promise, in my opinion, the way that Trump has done many empty promises. But it helps him, obviously, keeping the neocons and the warhawks off its back, because he has to contend with them at home. And the final point is that what's been going on very recently is the frozen assets of the frozen Russian assets that are at Euroclear, which is a company here in Belgium, in Brussels. And my wife actually used to work there, so I have a little bit of insight there. The European Commission basically wants our good friend Ursula von der Leyen wants to use this whole complicated mess that's going to be used as a loan for Ukraine, and then eventually it will have to be repaid after the war. Blah 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 blah. Long story short, if that happens, if the EU uses that frozen money, it's basically confiscating money from Euroclear, which is a financial institution which operates on trust. Now, the mere fact that they froze that money is a gigantic breach of the financial institutions, the way they work, and so on. The entire world has watched that and has started to act in accordance. We've got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they've said it, which is like BRICS Mini. They've said it explicitly. We're going to have our own version of Euroclear. And then everybody's like, it's never going to take off. Well, when you look at what the BRICS countries are doing, are they rising or are they falling? Are they gaining momentum or are they losing momentum? I think it's very clear there what's going on there. So our Prime Minister has recently said that there's no way you guys are going to touch that money, because that is going to cause a lot of problems here back home. It might destabilize the euro and so on. We'll see if he sticks by his word there. But all that boils down to a lot of desperation from our European leaders, is that they talk themselves into supporting Ukraine at any cost until the end of time. And now, as realization starts to set in, and I think also with the Americans, that this war is lost, there's nothing we can do to force Russia to A, get out, or B, accept some sort of if only a temporary truce, a ceasefire, which they say we're only interested if you guys want to talk in depth about solutions that fix this once and for all. And now we've got the blame game started with Angela Merkel actually saying, well, it's the fault of the Polish guys and the Baltic states, because I proposed a solution in 2021 and they said no, and that's why Putin attacked. So everybody's starting to tossing the blame around, covering their asses as to what should have been done. So you predicted. I mean, I'm gonna let you talk. You told me about what you predicted, where this would be, how it would end. But that is the big picture that I see it, and I'm leaving out so much. It's looking really, really bad, and I think realization is slowly dawning. Does that make any sense to you? I know it's a lot.
It does, and it's probably there's probably 104 things to rally off of what you said there, but probably four main ones to kind of bounce with in no particular order. And you've always put out this great phrase sort of on your socials for the longest time now of like, if you start a fight, you don't get to choose when it ends. You know, you've got great footage of like guys getting knocked out and then getting stamped on and ragdolled and thrown about. You're like, that's the thing. Like, you know, you pick the fight and you don't get to choose when it ends. I think I just want to turn that on its head and say, sometimes you don't get to choose when it starts. So you mentioned a few scenarios there where if this, then World War III, if this, then World War III. Russia's called it. You know, Lazarov said it weeks ago. We're officially at war with NATO. With the weapons already held in country and being used and utilized, we understand the Ukrainians themselves do not hold competence. So these weapon systems are being delivered, utilized, targeted, programmed, enabled, activated, maintained by NATO troops, unequivocally. And this was the interesting thing. When he made the statement, no one rebutted it. No one denied it. No one from the West leapt up and said, whoa, no, that's it. It was, oh. So Russia is at war with NATO because NATO is at war with Russia. Only one side's actually saying it right now, but that's where. And so if you look at World War I, World War II, when we say World War, you think every country was fighting. Well, no, there was an Axis and alliance. There was two conglomerated sides facing each other. So is it Russia versus NATO, or has Russia made some friends as well? And have those friends made some pretty profound public statements about where their support lies? Yeah, that's happened. And they've had a number of conferences, BRICS Plus and Shanghai Cooperation and more, that's put it in definitely the military warfighting space, but most importantly for us, that asymmetric space. So like you say, the economic, the grey zone, all of that stuff is deeply underway. So we've got a hot war with proxies, Ukraine being one, because there's other conflicts in Europe. Let's not forget that, right? All the focus is on Ukraine. Let's not just think there's peace everywhere around it. There's, you know, you go any direction, north, south, east, west, and there's additional proxies, especially down in the Balkans. A lot of activity going on down there geopolitically. So you've got the hot war, and you've got the, let's call it the lukewarm war, which is that sort of the grey zone, the asymmetric. And for the layperson that this is aimed at, the grey zone is the worrying one, because that's where the lines get blurred. This isn't about soldier X versus soldier Y and the Geneva Convention law of armed conflict and we get to kill each other. That's where anything starts to go now. Cyber attacks, espionage, sabotage, subversion, propaganda, disinformation, misinformation. Why do you think the West is so obsessed about misinformation, disinformation? Because they're so desperate to use it because they understand how powerful a tool it is. So we better use it on our population first before our enemy does, because everybody's got so good at this. That's the thing to understand with propaganda. It's very effective and it's very simple. So let's just part the asymmetric part and come back to that in a minute. The war of unintended consequences, the seized assets, yes, that's basically forced the opposition's hand to say, if we have no trust in global governance around finances anymore, we must create our own independent systems. And they were probably already doing that. They were already doing that. That has now got fast-tracked. That's come down from a 20-year geopolitical China timeline project, because China looks 10 to 50 years out. That's their biggest advantage, is they can genuinely strategic plan, while the West is addicted to news cycle politics, which is incredibly problematic. That's a problem of our own devising. And has now had to operationally scale that back down into more like 3 to 5 year planning. So that weaning off the petrodollar, weaning off SWIFT, weaning off the organisation that's there in Belgium is well underway out of necessity, quite simply. And once that lucrative alternative gets offered, you'll have a bunch of people that right now utilise the American-sponsored system will very much play both sides of the fence. And sadly, and I find myself saying this, you know, with a degree of trepidation, but also sadness, the only thing worse than being America's enemy is being their friend. And so that's the thing now. Europe has got absolutely shafted by the US. Not just in the Afghanistan withdrawal, which is easy to forget, that like Europe got violated, quite simply, in how the Americans did that. Now, Trump's not going to get his Nobel Prize that he wants for peace in Ukraine, so he's just going to throw his teddies and walk away and go, it's a European problem. And Europe has put itself unwaveringly in America's corner, and America's going to walk away. And like you said, they have now just painted themselves in either people are going to fall on their sword and resign and lose face and leave, or we're just going to keep on going. And sadly, every single potential exit out of this, we're driven past at increasing speed. So I just don't see a European politician taking an exit. So that escalation just keeps on going. And ultimately, when we look at that bigger picture, people being people, a lot of wars get entered into via a monkey dance, just like any conflict, just at a bigger political scale, because you can get two figureheads, get butthurt, and just have the ability with limited checks and balances to just take it all the way up to that level of conflict. And that's what we're seeing now, is basically just a bunch of monkeys throwing poo and getting very excited about it. That then really ties us into the actual fundamental problem for Europe, is that we're in a fiscal crisis, we're in an economic crisis. And so let's study history for a moment. History teaches us, by Western standards, when we're at this level of economic crisis, a wartime economy is the only thing that gets us out of it. That's the playbook. It's the only playbook. Never have we successfully exited an economic crisis. We've had depressions, we've had collapses, you've had hyperinflation. Actually, that's happened on the wartime economy as well. But the only way any government's ever successfully got out of this level of economic crisis is by kickstarting the wartime economy. Has that already happened? Yes. I told you this a year ago and then 2 years ago. Look at the 2025 military spending assessment budget, and that will tell you everything you need to know. Now, we're in 2025, so I'll tell you this. Look at the 26, 27, 28 spending budget and see how much more they are. Europe is trying to spend its way out of a problem it has bought with money it doesn't have to buy tools it then must use. You cannot stockpile war fighting equipment and not use it at this stage. Why not? Because you need to buy more of it. So you need to destroy what you have. How do you destroy your war fighting stockpiles? There's two ways you can do it. You can declare peace and throw it away and write it off the books. We are not in that stage. So what's the other one? You have got to use it. You have got to use it. That's the only way you can break it, is by using it for its intended purpose and saying we've run out and it needs replacing, or it's been destroyed and it needs replacing. It sounds dismissive and reductive to say it's that simple, but it's that simple. That's why I'm looking at the meta picture right now, because the granularity as we step back says either a politician is going to own a complete economic disaster, or they're going to try to fight their way out of it. And they've sat down at a table and agreed between them. They've got the opportunity, the means, and the intent. I think that's enough for a murder charge, if I remember correctly. If you're going to look in legal terms, they've got all those three things, and they absolutely are going to execute it. And you can see that not by policy, but by action. This isn't white paper proposals anymore. This is now government policy. Total defense, increase funding to all blue light services, increase funding to the military, increase unification, increase, escalation. Now we go back to, what are the Americans doing? They're just selling weapons. They're just doing what they've always done. They said, got some shiny stuff that might win the war for you. Are we going to buy it? Yeah, we are. Are we going to use it? We're going to have to. Is that a good idea? Absolutely not. Is that demanding a retaliation and response? Yes, it is. And that's my final point I want to hit here. We've seen an overwhelming amount of one-way traffic to Russia in terms of sanctions. As the sort of non-military intervention option. I think we're on our 16th round of sanctions.
19, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I had 11 and I was like, that was very old. Then I had 15, so I'll take 19. Let's go halfway between 16 and 19. We're somewhere in there. What we haven't seen is anything come back. And we sort of sit in our Western affluence and arrogance, isn't it? It's like, we could just throw shit at Russia and say it's taking effect. Russia's absorbed those sanctions relatively well, as much as we're told their economy is going to collapse within 3 months of the special military operation starting, because only we're calling it a war. Russia isn't, and that goes back to combat effectiveness. If they declared war, would it be fought and look very different? Yes, it would. And so my big question as we go towards the end of 2025, at what point do we inverse and Russia actually says, you know what, we've got some tools we can push back at you now, guys. Now, effectively, I can't say China's been their proxy because there's no way Russia is writing Chinese foreign policy. But when we look at anti-sanction activity or reverse sanction activity, China's been the driver. You know, restrictions of exports, restrictions of chips. Now we've put that down to the trade war, to the to Trump's policies on sort of trade embargoes or trade deficits or whatever the case may be. Again, that's a very convenient masking over that Axis ally aspect of it. You know, China has unequivocally stood with Russia and continues to stand. India's getting very rich off everybody. This perception that India is this like poor brown people begging for money, this third world economy is like laughable now because like they're laughing all the way to the bank. And so what you're seeing is some relatively discreet utilization of tools that as the political pressure starts to crank up and a truce is not being offered to Russia's standards because they've got all the cards, quite simply, they don't need to take a deal they're not happy with, which is what Trump's unhappy with. Then that pressure can start to be reversed and say, okay, guys, well, if you don't like what we're doing right now, wait until you see what we do with this. And those two things, most importantly for me, the asymmetric grey zone conflict and the inverse sanctions or the sort of reciprocity against those sanctions is what's going to hit us everyday people hard, in my mind, in this winter. You know, what are Russians great for is winter warfare. They utilize the environment. That mindset, that mentality of utilizing the battle space, I think they will take into their asymmetric campaigns, sadly, very effectively. And why very effectively? Because they've been listening. You know, with the social media saturation, with the data points that are out there for utilization, the West has used it for capitalization to basically make sure you get really high quality Amazon ads to buy things now. What have our adversaries been doing with that information? They're not selling the shit. Well, Alibaba is. Temu's doing pretty well as well. What they're doing is deeply understanding the psychological profile of their enemy. That's us, by the way. And they know us well now. And that information, I believe, is going to get utilized. And that's why the West is so trying to get ahead of the misinformation, disinformation campaign, because they know when our adversaries turn on their digital version, and they haven't turned it on yet, absolutely not. When they turn on their digital version, it is going to be incredibly compelling and good and effective. And that's why I think we're building in social media kill switches and internet kill switches on this side of the pond. China's already got theirs. Russia's already got theirs. They've already ring-fenced their digital footprint. So if they need to block out the West, they can. We haven't. And that's a huge vulnerability. And then you add in now the sprinkling, the ice on the cake is your AI, which can deep fake the shit out of anything. Like the quality. So I sent a clip to a friend of mine this morning of Joe Rogan commentating Winston Churchill in a UFC fight against Hitler, right?
I've seen those.
Right, and because everybody's dead, you know, it's a parody and it's a fake. Other than that, you just wouldn't. You know, if it was Joe Rogan narrating a fight between you and I, no one would know that it wasn't you and me because of the standard of the footage and the narration and the quality. And so this is the thing now, like, what's it going to be like when your prime minister comes on primetime TV and fluently, convincingly, compellingly, with all his tics and accents and quirks, says a compelling message of like, we're going to do this now, that isn't your government and isn't your minister and isn't your policy, right? And that's in play, that exists now. And so that's challenging because that's a threat that we've not faced previously. And so that's a large part of why I've done that digital weaning process as well, not only because the propaganda was just getting ridiculous, but it's kind of like, I could kind of see large parts of our digital lives just getting restricted or obliterated. It's just gone.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't exist anymore. We don't use TikTok anymore. Look, you know, America made that policy. Trump came in, like, basically we're going to ban TikTok. Now, okay, the capitalists have said, whoa, hang on a minute. There's some sums to be done around here. But if we put that at national security level threat, which it is, by the way, because it is a weapon, and just said we'll just switch it off, okay. But that's a lot of people's, you know, the impact of that on people's livelihoods. How many people, you know, how many influencers don't have a job if their platform of choice cease to exist or be accessible? So that's where I'm trying to take it down into kind of the impact. You know, I use YouTube for information to a point and entertainment to a point. But if it was my entire business model, I'd be very, very nervous right now. Not only because of AI, but just because of the risk of it just getting completely unplugged.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. A few things that I can say in response is that so the sanctions packages, you can look this up, but Europe has bought more from Russia since the beginning of the war than it has delivered aid to Ukraine. Just looking at monetary value. So despite all the sanctions, we are still trading with Russia tremendously. So does the US, by the way. The US buys uranium from Russia because it needs it. And this is true in, I mean, Europe, US, same thing. Yes, you can shout about sanctions however much you like, but you're actually still buying. And this is what I think it was the Indian Prime Minister who responded to Trump basically doing the secondary tariffs on India. I said, look, I mean, you're saying we can't trade with Russia, but you're trading with Russia. Here it is. So, you know, why this is nonsense basically. He tried to do it with China. China said, okay, we're going to restrict your access to this, and this, which you absolutely need. And very quickly the sanctions on China went away. And the rest of the world is now increasingly seeing like, look, there is an alternative to the US market. And the whole tariff war, which I when it started, I was like, I don't see how this ends well. It's gradually sinking in to the United States that actually there is a different market out there that is also big, that is other than the United States, and that's the rest of the world. The rest of outside of the Western world, which I think is like over 80% of the population, that's a pretty big market. And yes, obviously, the U.S. market is different than like a third world country, but that's not the point. What you see now, for instance, is that Russia has basically given up on trading with Europe. Like it's oriented towards Asia and BRICS countries. One of the examples is that the gas pipeline between China and Russia was announced, and one of the things they're doing, the gas fields that were actually earmarked for Europe are now going towards China, and that's a final decision. So regardless of the war in Ukraine ending now and economical ties between Europe and Russia start up again, they're going to be like, guys, you blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, somebody did, it wasn't us. You guys didn't want any of us. You put sanctions on us. Why would we trust you? Why would we give you the one thing you desperately need to save your economy, which is cheap energy? We're going to give it to China. They're not bombing us. They're not attacking us. And we may not be the best of friends, but they're better allies. And India, I mean, the big picture of Xi Jinping, Prime Minister Modi, and Putin just smiling and hugging and shaking hands, that everybody, in the West should have shit their pants at that. And it reminds me of Biden, and I think in the 90s, saying like, Russia turning to China, that'll never happen. And Brzezinski with his, the Grand Chessboard book is like, it's never going to happen. Russia and China and all that kind of stuff. And now it happened. Yeah. So that brings us to Europe. So like you mentioned, like there's a lot of stuff going on. The digital ID in the UK is a hot button topic. CBDC, so central bank digital currency, which basically means that the government can say like your money expires in a year if you don't use it. You cannot use your money for X, Y, and Z, or you've spent your CO2 quota already, so you're not saving the environment. That's going to happen. Chat control is going to be, if I understand correctly, it was voted against, which is basically the European Union deciding that every single cell phone gets a backdoor that the government can look at. No, but it's for child pornography. We need to do something against that. Think of the children, Toby, We got to save the children. We're going to read every single one of your messages. And we're going to watch at every single picture that you have on your phone and video. And there's going to be no abuse ever. Because in the history of technology, that never happens to these tools. So that's going to be fine. But that's apparently, I think today or yesterday, they voted against it or going to. And I think von der Leyen also announced something like an Institute for Democracy, which is basically going to tackle fake news, quote unquote, be the Ministry of Truth. George Orwell spinning in his grave so fast that the planet is going out of whack. So all that means that control and repression of the European citizens. And you and I have talked about that with what's going on in the UK, with that big march that happened in London and so on. So I'll, like I did for Ukraine, I'm just gonna spill out some of my thoughts about Europe, what's happening, the holding out de facto or dissolving of the European Union is happening. It's already begun. We see things like Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic now with recently with elections that they had, basically saying like we don't want anything to do with this Ukraine war, no more money, nothing, and so on. Poland is interesting because obviously they have a vested interest in what happens with the western part of Ukraine. There's a lot of apparently plans being made that actually might, after the war, go to Poland in some form or another. They've got this prime minister who is more pro-Europe, but this president who's actually not as interested in offering pushback and doing this balancing act. So that's going on. But basically, increasingly, we see that European countries are starting to fight amongst themselves, disagree publicly, as opposed to behind the scenes. And we have, for instance, our prime minister earlier this week gave his this speech, which is the way that he communicates. He doesn't talk much, but then he gives a big speech, and he said, look, we need to revive the Benelux. Benelux is the predecessor to the European Union. It's Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg formed this kind of partnership, mostly economical, but a little bit more than that. And he said, we have to focus again. What does that mean? It means that nationalism comes back and this internal focus. Not Europe, but Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. We're neighbors. We can work together. We share a language and so on. So we're going to take care of ourselves. What else? European economy. Well, it's going to go into a depression. If officially it hasn't, but in the last 6 weeks, in a period of 6 weeks, this is about a month or two old, 125,000 layoffs in Germany in different industries. Stellantis, which is one of the biggest car manufacturers in Europe, there's a total shutdown of its factories. Like we stopped working with factory. The factories shut down. We're done because of low demand. So our Chancellor Merz of Germany has admitted that actually the economy in Germany is in much worse shape than he thought even a year ago. So all these things are happening, have been going on. Belgium is struggling for finding a balanced budget because we have a huge deficit, and that is one of the reasons why the Prime Minister fights for Euroclear not using those frozen assets, because we actually get taxes on that and we need that for our own budget. On top of that, we have many EU governments wildly unpopular. And we've got France, I mean, what is the fifth or the sixth Prime Minister now that is basically resigned. Macron is trying to pull a rabbit out of his hat to survive, but that's going on his last legs. Keir Starmer in the UK, extremely unpopular. Germany is not that at that point yet, but getting there. AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, is actually growing tremendously and all across the spectrum with the population, not just limited to the supposedly right-wing individuals. So it's all over. It's all over. So they increasingly lose legitimacy, which is an issue. And on top of that, the institutions are failing more and more, whether it's healthcare, whether it is our media and so on. Nothing works much. The biggest bridge in the world, I think, was unveiled a few days ago in China. It's gigantic. They built it in 3 years. We have a viaduct over Vilvoorde, which is a town outside of Brussels, which is a Brussels highway, the busiest place in our country. And we have some of the most hectic traffic in Europe. It's going to take 8 years to fix it, to renovate it. It took 4 years to build it in, I think, the 70s or the 60s, I forget. So we can't do anything anymore. Nothing works. And then we get to the really juicy part, the immigrant population, asylum seekers, and so on. I'm old enough to remember when a far-right party here in Belgium did really well in the elections over 30 years ago, and that was called Black Sunday over here. The problems that they talked about were denied for decades, and you were called a racist asshole if you talked about it. But now they can no longer be ignored. Nobody's happy about it, but that's, especially in the UK, and in Ireland, this is a really big thing. Now, what you see then happening as the economy goes down the drain, I think it was 1/3 of European population has trouble paying the bills right now, and in former Eastern Bloc countries, it's much higher. So as people have difficulty just living their life and paying bills, they see that others can come to Europe and ask for asylum and get social services, housing, and so on. And on top of that, the citizens here get more taxes. So what will be the next enemy? Well, clearly this is a flashpoint. Immigration is going to be one of the biggest issues that are going to be used by, and this is where we get it, by the popular uprising, by the civil unrest, and even civil war. Is when we talked about that years ago, I was like you're insane, and now you've got politicians and professors talking about it publicly. I'm like, okay. You mentioned this to me a while ago. What is obviously going to be the reaction by the government's repression? It's going to try to keep control and keep actually their hold on society. And I mentioned the digital ID, CBDC, and so on. But on top of that, we've got the openly hostile rhetoric towards Russia. And like you said, the budgets are going one way. If the hybrid warfare starts hitting a lot harder, European citizens are not ready for that. They have no idea what's coming. So I see two possible scenarios. Either our fearless leaders in Europe will be able to massage the public opinion and the narrative to the point that they can get away with starting a war and going after Russia, and basically try to manage the debt and so on. And the irony is that right now they're talking about the Russian economy will crash because they turned it into a wartime economy. What are we going to do? We're going to do a wartime economy, but ours won't crash because not all wartime economies crash. Okay, whatever. I mean, the cognitive dissonance is impressive. But what I see is two things. Either that's going to happen, or we have too much public resistance thanks to social media access, which, for right now still happens. A rise to power of populists, grabbing power, nationalism taking over, decentralization away from Europe, like I explained, countries doing more working together as opposed to via the EU. And a mostly positive possible scenario would be that these nationalists come to power and basically block the EU machine. And so that's it. We don't want war. We want to go back to EU, which was about economic cooperation, and not this power block, this global player, this military power that it's transforming into. We don't want that. So less EU and more economy and localized, nationalized stuff. That would be, I think, the least bad option. But I wouldn't put any money on it. So if I were a betting man, which I am not, I would think that your forecast is much, much more accurate. That's it. I'm done. Thoughts from your end?
So brilliant summary. There's nothing I'm going to disagree with in there. And I think, given everything that's happened since we last spoke, that's like really just the poignant, punchy points. Lots happened, but
I'm leaving out so much. I mean,
yeah, and you've got to. That's the other thing. Otherwise, you just get lost in the swamp, or lost in the marshes. And really, that fragile domestic situation is why we see the wailing rhetoric of Russia. Like, we've got to externalize that threat. And what the government hopes is we'll unify the people around that external threat. We'll get the jingoism We'll get people, the left-leaning politicians that hate their countries but will try to utilize nationalism to unify the population behind them. Oh, the irony, right? And the double standard of sovereignty is just exquisite, isn't it? Like you say, like Russia's got a wartime economy, so it's collapsing, but ours is going to be great. Like it's just the cognitive dissonance, as you said, is just breathtaking. Effectively, again, if you'll indulge me at looking at just like the biggest picture, these are, let's give the benefit of the doubt, well-meaning structures that are now not fit for purpose. Like when NATO was created, when the EU created, if we care to be indulgent, we could say it was well-meaning. We could be a bit cynical and say, actually, from the get-go, these were quite nefariously set up, but let's be positive. But they are not fit for purpose anymore. And so what's needed is basically new systems. You cannot fix what's so broken, and you can't dismantle it and build from there. We now need a phoenix moment to basically burn it down to rise from the ashes. And that's going to have to happen somehow. So there's two things I see going. Either we limp on with the status quo, and what you need there for the sort of South African solution is the acquiescence of the population to just get so down into like infighting that they never aspire for higher governance. And I just don't think that's going to happen in Europe. I think we just have too rich a history of enough populist uprising to just say, no, whether it's getting the guillotines out for the French or, tarring and feathering people in the streets, or, we have a knowledge and a power of populist uprising to just say, we will make our government accountable. Now, that's going to be a midterm process because whoever stands up to say, I'm going to fix this, isn't. And so we're going to have to go through 2 to 3 iterations of burning it all down before we actually get to near the bottom where it can rebuild. And most importantly, the populace can trust the people, because it needs to be people, not a person, to actually deliver on their promises. What we've got now is such a level of corruption in politics that people only want to rise to power. They're never going to do the right thing for the country. They are just going to get to a position to exploit it as much as they possibly can, to line their own pockets, to look after their friends, to then just cycle out and go from there. That's the current political cycle we're in. So effectively, in my mind, the type of conflict for that solution is irrelevant. However, to the layperson, to the individual in the street, there is going to be a big difference between World War III and Civil War. And let's just look at it like this. The government cannot tolerate a civil war. It'll take a World War III because there's a playbook for that. For a government, civil war is the existential threat. That is the risk of government falling. So what's the only playbook for a civil war? People are going to fight. They've had enough. They're going to fight. It's now divide and conquer. We're going to have to give them grounds to fight each other. And so that is the government agendaizing. Let's take the UK example, because it's my home country, and what has just been an outright 30-year plus ban on negative reporting against Muslims. In a week, if that narrative changed, there's your war in the streets, right? There's your war in the streets. Super simple. And one side will start it, and the other side is sufficiently propagandized and ready to say, we're now under threat, we need to fight back. And the government can sit back and effectively just let those two problematic groups, the fighting age males of both sides that are troublesome, just kind of kill themselves. Now, here's the problem. All of these civil war scenarios from governance intervention look great on paper. It can be that simple. We'll get the Tommy Robinson crowd. They're already riled up. We'll just get them a bit more incentivized. We'll just leak a couple of stories about, confirmation of rape gangs. Then we'll start to hang some Muslims out to dry, and there's our civil war, and away we go. And we'll mop up in a couple of weeks. That's exactly what Yugoslavia did. That was the host nations, if you care to read the history, got together and said, right, Russia's failing. We see that. We've been raised in the communist system. We've always known it was going to crumble. That's happening. We're going to revert to our nation states. We've all got our ideas on what we want our borders to be. What we need to do is a controlled demolition of Yugoslavia. So we're going to kind of up the ethnic narrative. We're going to raise the temperature. We're going to have to go back a little bit in history to kind of get people championing about, injustices. We're going to get that fight on the go. We'll then do our military intervention. We'll realign our borders, and everybody's happy. And all the governance of the host states agreed on that. Then they lit the fuse. And then it went. The Balkan conflict, as we call it, but it was a war for sure. Ask anyone on the Balkans, it was definitely a war. It was meant to last 2 weeks. All the plans that have now been declassified to 16 days. Right, that's it done. That was the plan because of troop movements and all this and the other. And moving of the other assets in the background. We won't get into that. How long did it last? 3 years, and it was a genocide because they didn't understand the power of what they ignited. So they got people so riled up and so nationalistic and so nationally proud that once it started, it couldn't stop. And then once a certain level of atrocities had hit, it was then just tit for tat. And then it became exploitative. Then that criminality came in, the warlords. That was that point I made earlier about moving out of the shadows into the light, or actually being, and you know this, I've said for years, there is no without rule of law, WROL, that the prepper sphere is obsessed with. There's just a different rule of law. So government can't control the population, the police, the military doesn't work, the criminal gangs will, because they will use tools that work that governments can't or won't. And so once you got a certain level of criminal overlord or warlord in place, peace just didn't sound like a good option. They ran their own fiefdoms. They ran their own kingdoms. And how did we enable peace in the Balkans in the end? Well, one, the Americans got involved and just started bombing shit like they normally do. And two, and this is what people forget, and this you can go down to the Balkans and still see this today, either same people or their sons. What was brought to the negotiating table is whoever owns whatever now will legitimize you. So if you are a warlord and you run this region and you sign this peace agreement, you'll be the mayor. That's it. We will not out you. We will not seek to destabilize your power. We'll legitimize your power base. And they thought they would then get like aspiring politicians. What they didn't understand is warlords then just consolidate their power base and just double down on it. Which is why, and you've seen country by country how stagnated or not the Balkans became. So Croatia went pro-European, and only in the last 10 years actually got there. It took them 20 years to kind of generationally wean off the winners that were the warlords into a new generation that aspired to kind of go pro-Western. And even then it wasn't without difficulty. Bosnia completely stagnated, just a cacophony of cantons that are ruled as fiefdoms with loose governance thrown over the top to basically justify funding from the rest of the world. Serbia, even I'm not brave enough to talk that much about it, went pro-Russia and basically aligned themselves that way and sort of effectively work off communism light, shall we say. But still enabled those people. The ruthless power base became more ruthless and then just consolidated. Colombian cartel styled, the big states started to eat the smaller states until they got enough consolidated power to form, what effectively became government. All those things take time, but the conflict, the spark, we're looking at 1 to 3 years. And so, conscious of time, conscious of not waffling on, conscious of the layman listening to this, whatever's happening is coming more quickly. The news cycle can't keep up with the destabilization. Those small bubbles are coming in the water that the frog is currently sitting in, and soon it'll start to boil. So we're starting to see an effect. And so in my mind, the next 12 to 18 months is when we transition from this peaceful time that we've had since the end of the Second World War, ish, into significant escalation of conflict. Now, I see one of two conflicts, unification around World War III or descending into civil disorder. I want to say it will vary country by country, but what Europe needs is is coordination and consolidation for the one. And I think if one domino tips, if one European country pops civil unrest first, the rest will quickly follow. Especially because what we're seeing, exactly as you said, is now a turning away from centrist parties and a very strong far-right movement. The people are very clearly expressing their dissatisfaction and impatience. And so the nonsense needs to stop, but it can't. The governments have just painted themselves in a corner. So it's only now how quickly the narrative can be controlled in one direction or the other. The World War III narrative is what we've got, and that's what's being controlled. Does something happen at the ground level that pops the civil uprising first? That I don't know, because every country is different. It's got its own language, it's got its own culture, it's got its own nuance. That said, post-COVID, people were pissed. It's not got any better. And let's just address the elephant in the room. If this was just a normal development of historical curve, where we are now is not good, but it's recognizable. Throw in that 24 months of agitation at the start of the decade that, you know, either people just went all in and brown shirted themselves, and that's fine, we're not going to talk about that. But that has left a lingering bitter taste in many more mouths than people care to admit to. And that's still very fresh. And so we cannot ignore at our peril how we started going into this process, the Ukrainian war, which started in 2016 but became mainstream in 2020-22, is a little bit kind of an unknown. Let's put it like that. And so, you know, as a father to a son and a daughter with their futures in mind, I kind of want the World War III scenario, because that sort of has a survivability and sort of plays out in a known way-ish. Because let's be honest, no one wants to go nuclear. You know, no leader wants to press the red button because that's bad for business. And ultimately, these are business people. The descent into civil conflict, those models don't look good. You know, there's way more wild cards around that. So I hope it doesn't go there. But the more I look around and the more I listen, the more, unless something significant happens in the next 12 months, which it may have done if Trump would have got the peace deal, but it's just not happening, the more I think in European terms, that's the direction we're going to go. And even if we don't go full-blown civil conflict, what we will get is massive criminal escalation, because the government switches out focus from dealing with breaking the law or dealing with criminals and organized gangs into just managing their population, carrot and stick. And so you'll either get outright civil war or civil conflict light, because your and I daily experience has way more violence in it no matter what. And that's really my sort of summary scenario over the next 24 months. You'll have less money that will buy less things, and you'll be exposed more routinely to violence no matter where you are.
Yep. And quick to your point, like when you mentioned about legitimizing warlords, a lot of people will go like, Toby, that's totally exaggerated. I'm like, maybe so. However, I could give you the example of a Mr. Al-Jolani, who is an Al-Qaeda leader, who has death on his hands, who is now the recognized leader of Syria, who Trump called, good-looking guy or a strong guy or whatever, shook his hands and that, who was invited to speak at the United Nations. So we're talking Al-Qaeda that, you know, brought down the Twin Towers. One of its leaders is brought to the United Nations in New York, and he is hailed as a hero, as a great guy who's a leader and this and that. But talking to Russia, no, we can't do that. Those bastards are evil. I'm like, okay. I mean, the cognitive dissonance there is quite impressive as well. So, but that kind of brings me to the last topic, and we have to watch the time because I know you have to go in a bit. United States. So we talked about this beforehand. Again, I'll quickly go over it. When Charlie Kirk was shot, I did a podcast episode about it that I will put that in the show notes, a link to that. It's not that long, and just my thoughts in general. But I saw that and I was like, that's it, we're done. The Rubicon is crossed. There's no off ramp anymore. Um, I posted some stuff about that on my Facebook page, and I discussed it with people what I saw happening afterwards, and I discussed it on purpose just to see the reactions to confirm if I was right or not. And obviously, sample size bias and all that kind of stuff. Yes. However, the exact same thing that people on the right, conservatives, have complained about, the cancel culture from the left and from the establishment, they're doing the exact same thing now. No, Wim, it's not the same thing, because why would you want to have somebody in your company who is cheering on the murder of somebody? I'm like, you're right. I understand. I wouldn't want that either. But that's freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment. People can say disgusting things, which you said that was a sacrosanct thing. I mean, we have to protect freedom of speech, right? You cannot punish people for it. You can't cancel them. You can't brigade the social media of some company and to put pressure on them until, or boycott them until they fire somebody that you said something you don't like. Yeah, but it's not the same thing. I'm saying it's the exact same thing. The principle is exactly the same. The principle is cancelled culture is bad. The principle is not cancel culture is bad, except for the exceptions that we don't like. People didn't get it. You couldn't get through. So I'm at the point where it's no longer about principles. The polarization is so huge that people are, and literally saying it, and not just a random guy on the internet, people with gigantic platforms, Congress people and so on, literally saying like, yeah, you're right, we shouldn't do that, but fuck you, we don't care anymore because you want us dead. The amount of Democrats and people on the left who celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. I mean, online, and again, not just small accounts, but the numbers were high. Loads of people, and people who do have a platform was very, very large. And the reaction on the conservatives and the right side was like, you do want us dead. You really want us dead. You want to kill us. There's no discussing anymore. It's over. So what was the result? Well, we have a lot of things that I also saw. Overnight radicalization towards the right of a lot of people in the United States. People who were on the left coming out of the woodwork saying, I never talk politics. People with, with CEOs of companies, with thousands of thousands of followers online saying like, never talk politics, but I'm done with the Democratic Party. I just registered as a conservative. People who were at the center moved to the right. People who were on the right moved to the far right. And saying like, it's on. We see the Antifa. Trump is going after them now. They're doing a lot of work, which I think is long overdue. And they are still protesting and being violent, especially with the ICE raids, the Immigration and Customs going after the illegals, deporting them. The ICE is not letting that happen. They're actually fighting back, like they weren't doing. Law enforcement wasn't doing that during George Floyd at all. So there's a huge change there. And you see Trump using the National Guard, which is everybody's outraged about, but nobody cared when Governor Hochul of New York did that to secure the subways. Then it's okay to use National Guard, but not when Trump does it. Again, cognitive dissonance is interesting. All that and much more. Elbridge Colby's posture paper about the American military apparently says that focusing on the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. That's what the military is going to do. And Trump is clearly doing that, trying to restore order and, like I said, regaining control of society. All that to say that I can only see civil unrest and civil war, even secession, certain states leaving the Union, which is something that is talked about at the highest political levels. Over here in Europe, we don't hear about it much, but it is discussed. Like, okay, maybe we should just leave. That's it. We no longer want to be with those people. And Balazs Srinivasan said that, and I think it was the number of marriages between Democrats and Republicans, and I'm blanking on the percentage, but I think it was less than 5% or something. Which means that separate culture, completely separate culture. Different countries within the same geographical area. And now one side says that we think you guys want to kill us. in massive numbers. So I can only see the scenario that we just talked about for Europe, with eventually some form of civil uprising, civil war, and so on. And I think we could make the case that in the US it's actually already started. That only getting worse, and Trump just trying to stomp it out more, which is going to make him look even more authoritarian and dictator-like and so on, which gives the other side even more reason to say, see, we always said that he was a dictator, that he was Hitler, that he was a fascist. Look what he's doing now. Like, I'm gonna share my Tom Cruise, Jack Reacher meme again. Like, you guys wanted this. I started talking about this 5 to 10 years ago. This only leads to the destruction of your society, and it's gonna lead to civil war. And everybody like, you're full of it. I'm like, hey, dude, you're there now. Don't look at me. You laughed at my face. You called me an idiot for saying that, and we're here now. And now your politicians are saying it publicly. Your professors are saying it publicly. We're going towards civil war. I'm like, what do you want? What do you want me to say? Anyway, over to you.
Yeah, again, great summary. I agree, and I think we've sort of, on both sides of the pond, and the pond I mean Atlantic Ocean, I've sort of built this segregation, separation between America and Europe. But we forget that structurally they were all built coming out of the Second World War. Now, obviously, America prospered more. That's a whole thing to talk about. But there was a huge amount of cross-pollination in structural development, and a huge amount of cross-collaboration and cooperation in that development. So as we say the European structures are no longer fit for purpose, aren't working, basically need to collapse and then rebuild, exactly the same in the US. And we could almost argue that a lot of the European structures have only worked because they've been propped up by the US. So the US is the canary in the coal mine. And if you look at it less as a country and more a collection of states, and if we said each state was its own country, it looks a lot more like Europe than we realize. And when I first went to America, it took me a long time to kind of get my head around the difference between the federal government and the states, because I look at America as America. It's America, it's one country, and it isn't. And unless you've been to the US, it's very hard to figure that out. And unless you've traveled around the US, like if you just get to New York, you just get to LA, you'll believe that part. Whereas once you start dotting around a little bit, and you've been to the US, you've been around like me, you start to kind of understand. Like Americans go, I went to Europe, it was amazing. It's like, yeah, but like there was a difference between like Paris and Italy, right? And they go, it's all the same to me. It's kind of like the same with the US, but our version. So, okay, I'll stop bashing them, bless them. So yeah, they are in that controlled demolition phase. Like, the narrative is being intentionally picked to pit certain sides against each other, on politics, on race, increasingly on age. It's just pick a box and climb in it so we know who's fighting who. And social media has really compartmentalized people in that, and it's been quite interesting to see, especially for the US social media experience, how much in the last 5 years those companies have forced you to really like nail your algorithm so they know what box to put you in. Not saying that we haven't, but it's been harder from the European experience to kind of do. So we should definitely be looking at the US for the warning signs. But they are culturally going to go on their own journey, sadly, because they're a very young country. This has always been America's problem. Like, they're the youngest country in the world, quite simply. They're effectively 270 years old, and they only got self-governance in 1774 when they were unhappy with the good governance that they had. Once they decided to go their own way and throw the Brits out, which is understandable. So what they lack, sadly, in the greater geopolitical sphere is depth and maturity and history to fall back on, which Europe's got. So if we collapse the EU, or wrong, when the EU collapses, generationally, we've got a place to fall back to. It might not be perfect, but there's a sort of home to go back to, either because that generation's still alive, our grandparents, or if our grandparents are all dead, we've still got a memory, people our age, similar age, you and I, Wim, our parents, we kind of got that memory of what it was before, and we can read our history and understand where we've come from. Britain ruled the world for many years, as did France, as did Spain. There's a depth of history. There's a cultural, very deep well to draw from to calm and stabilize things. So as much as the rhetoric can get inflamed, it can get calmed on the other side of remember our values, remember who we are as a people. We're better than this. You know, we created democracy, we ended slavery, we gave birth to philosophy, if you're Greek, and olives. And now I'm gonna do this to you. But we've got that to fall back on. And so if the flames get a bit too high, there's a hope they can get dampened. America doesn't have that, and that's very worrying, especially as a nuclear asset, especially so as the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, because that's where if they really want to have a teenage tantrum, which is our biggest existential threat aside from looking east, is America basically saying like we're not going to play nice with anyone, and so we're going to throw our teddies out the plan. And so in a way, again, and as much as I smile, I'm being cheeky because it's a coping mechanism. I'm deeply saddened by this because the American experiment had the greatest proof of potential. But if it's going to collapse, it needs to fall inwards. For the sake of the world, geopolitically, we need America to internally collapse. Because if they project all that force that they have outwards, we've got a big, big problem. We've got a huge, great big problem. And so as much as I love the US and I've got great friends in America and admire their aspiration, if they are going to continue on the journey they're on, and again, I just don't see how they're going to get out of it right now, we almost need it to be within their borders. So when Trump's policies came in of American exceptions, America first, close the borders and go in-house, it was almost like, thank you, but not for the sake of the American people, but for the rest of the world. Because that projection of American force, especially interference in foreign policy, has created a lot of the problems that we see right now, sadly. So, I kind of wish them well, but it's not that we don't have problems to deal with ourselves on this side of the ocean. And so I think it's that sort of, it's been fun hanging out with the cool kids for a while, but we're all about to graduate high school and go on our own career journeys. If I'm going to put it in that kind of playground analogy that sometimes you put these things into, not to be flippant about it, but we're definitely hitting that sort of threshold crossing. Now, speaking to Charlie Kirk specifically, I don't think it's crossing the Rubicon. I don't think that in and of itself is the Archduke Ferdinand moment. But I definitely think historically people look back at the turning point, which is the irony that was the organization he actually stepped, in his death, he basically lived up to the origins of the movement that he started. I think that has, and this, Wim, I've been passionately centric for half a decade or more. Like, we need to hold the middle ground. We have to sit in the middle and be able to discuss. I've got friends on the left, the right, and the extremes of both sides. And I sort of maintain contact with them for various reasons. But I've really held that centrist position. Now people are getting forced. It's like, pick a side. And Selko speaks about this extensively. It's like, stay neutral until there's no other choice. Now, I remember asking him years ago, when will I know there's no other choice? And he says, it'll be obvious. Like, your neutrality will be unacceptable to everybody. And that's where America's got to. I think the Charlie Kirk incident, or Charlie Kirk murder, let's call it what it is, assassination, started to basically eviscerate the few remaining people that were holding that center ground that are either now not going to be tolerated at best, or even themselves have looked internally and said, I'm going this direction now. Like that, I've got to sort of put this. And I sort of half jokingly said to someone a couple of weeks ago, they were asking about political affiliation. And I said, if you asked me for my entire life, I'd say slightly centre right, but with specific left-leaning policies, but now pure anarchist, right? Because it really, for me, I'm like, I just don't see a political solution right now. Like, with the current system we all have, I'm almost like no governance works. Now, of course, anarchy is not the solution, and I'm again being sort of flippant, but it's that whichever direction you face, there's just choices that aren't working right now. Yeah. And history's, excuse me, sorry, I felt like coming a while ago. History's resplendent with those cyclical natures of bad events happening, governance coming out of it, democracy being instilled, or dictatorship, growth aspiration and, attaining a degree of comfort, and then it comes down the other side. And we use the meme, what was it? Hard men, hard times create hard men. Hard men create good times. Good times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. But it sort of feels that that's what we're moving through right now, And there's a reason memes resonate. I don't want to do podcasts of just referencing memes, as good as they are, but it captures a public sentiment, and so that's where I feel we're at. Is that the Charlie Kirks of now and of the future, because there's going to be more of them, and that's the precedent that was set. Charlie wasn't a politician. He wasn't even particularly famous. He wasn't a big celebrity. He had his following, and it was a respectable following. And he did what he did, and he did it to the best of his ability. But when your opposition says, we'll kill you for just doing things like that, that's a gloves off moment, if nothing else. And it legitimizes the opposite side to reciprocate. So like you say, your experience was, all of the right wing have been like, no, like freedom of speech is enshrined, and now it's like, okay, we've had enough. You've rammed these tools down our throat for a decade plus. We'll start using them against you. And that was the thing. The left always relied on the fact the right would not sink to their level of operational deployment. And I think now we're getting there, that the right's going to say, fine, we're just going to jump in the trenches and fight you at your own game. And that's going to get messy.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think that, his assassination is a Franz Ferdinand moment, sorry. I do think it's like this turning point, as you aptly said,
yes.
That the way I saw it, that was the last off-ramp that just blew up. There's no off-ramp anymore.
I think so.
And how long will it take? How far will it go? What will happen? Again, these things are impossible to predict. But I don't see how there can be an off-ramp. I was very focused on following what happened in the days and weeks after. And the more I saw, the more the picture became clear, is that no, the off-ramp is gone. The only thing that could have done something even remotely, possibly trying to stop that from happening, would have been this unifying moment from the Democrats and Republicans under the banner of Trump. Like, look, this is it. We need to unite as a country. No more of this division. We stop demonizing each other. No more talk about fascist this, then libtard that. We're going to stop with all that. But that didn't happen. That wouldn't, I mean, again, I'm not a betting man, but I would have put 0.0001% of that happening, just to be realistic, that in some realm, in some dimension, that chance exists, but in ours, on our planet, no. So that was the only thing that I saw that could potentially have an impact, but the opposite happened. Now, again, understandably so. This is the big thing that I had when I talked with people on the right about all this. I said, look, I get it. I get why you're angry. But just as I was complaining about cancel culture from the left for years on end, I'm going to complain about cancel culture from the right and say it's wrong.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to disagree with me on that. Please remember all the years that you agreed with me when I said that the guys doing it to you were wrong. And if you don't care about that anymore, I'm going to put up my meme again of, principles only matter if you stick to them when they're inconvenient to you. And if you disagree with it, that's fine. I'm not angry, I'm not upset, but I'll just, do the whole Anton van Wilderode poem again. It's like, look guys, I'm not picking a fight, but if I'm just going to say that if I see something is wrong, I'm not going to say it's right. That's all. And I get you, I understand you, I know why you're furious, I totally get your point. I get it. But I also see where this is leading. And it's not going to lead to a good place. Quite on the contrary.
And I think that and then unfortunately I have to watch the time. I think the key thing for me in conclusion here is saying now people have lost the will, desire, or see any advantage in holding the moral high ground. Politics of the last 20 years has been about that moral superiority in different ways. Now that was hijacked with virtue signaling, but there was definitely a lot of politics was just letting sleeping dogs lie, to be like, just don't. It's annoying, but it's happening. But so long as we kind of keep an even keel up here, we'll do okay. Like there's just certain rules not to be breached, and they've been slowly eroded away. So now everybody's a Nazi. Both sides have Nazis and fascists. Every side is full of Nazis and fascists. Well, okay, so who is? Everybody's racist somehow. Like everybody's everyist in existence, and it's like with now that all the morals have eroded, there is no moral high ground or code to adhere to. So now it's just gutter fighting, and everybody loses. But that's where we've allowed or demanded our politics to slip to, sadly. And that's a big hole that's been dug on our voting population's watch. And we're all in it. That's the thing. We're in the trenches now. Are we going to climb out of them and wave flowers, or are we going to double down and fight? That's the only question. And I think too many people are going to double down and fight.
Yeah. So after this fun and uplifting and positive talk that we've had so far,
as always, we have been slightly cheerful on this one. So. In all fairness, I think that the middle ones were definitely far more doom and gloom than we are now. Even though like tens of millions of people are going to die.
I mean, we look at all the storms to come. So what can people do? I will share obviously the talk you graciously gave us during COVID about the pillars of basically urban survival. So I would very much recommend everybody go watch that podcast episode, just to give you a solid foundation in how to basically get ready for some of these really difficult times that historically always happen in the cycle that we're at right now. But anything that you want to share on this front, people say like, okay, Toby, Wim, I've heard you. What do I do now?
Yeah, I think for me, on this specific one I mentioned to you before we started recording, like for today's podcast, it was very much less about those hard skills, that preparedness, pillars, this is it. And it is just now that mindset, the acknowledgement of the time that we're in. We are in time of sufficient and of significant change and turmoil. And so being aware of that, and I'm very explicitly telling people very close to me, we are in World War III. We are. And they're like, oh God, here goes Toby again. And then I'm sort of just throwing 3 or 4 statements at them and saying, refute it. All right, tell me by definition how we're not. Right? And so it's very much cold water therapy treatment right now. Like we just can't be nice about this stuff anymore. So we've just got to start engaging with that brutal reality. I'm going to be having conversations next month with people of like, when I get deployed, not if. The last 2 years has been a if I get deployed. Now for me, reading all the briefs we're getting, looking at the train scenarios we're going through. I was literally on Garrison this morning before I came here, and it is like, we are going to get deployed out. Whether it's for training or whether it's for real is irrelevant. Ultimately, that's me getting taken away from my family, putting my phone in a lockbox until further notice. And so everybody around me needs to be ready for that contingency, because it's like, for the longest time, I've been the centerpin of like, I've got this. And so long as everyone's around, like we're good. And now I'm just having to sort of forcibly detach myself and say, there's no option for me not to deploy. Then, I'll get a day at best before the police turn up, and I'm either going to prison or I'm deployed. So why would I even start on that way? Like I signed up for it, so I'm up. So I think it is just to, sadly, kind of land as close to where we are as possible. As you see, we're very relaxed. We're not panicking. We're not shrieking. We're not crying. We're not wailing. We're not pleading with our ancestors. You and I, as fully grown adults living in Western society, have said and had a civilized conversation around, this is our current reality. There is conflict already. That conflict is escalating. It's probably going to take one of 2 forms. It is coming, and start to get around that. And so that's really the key takeaway. So people don't go to Walmart or equivalent and buy stuff to feel better. It's like actually sit down with a cup of coffee or something stronger and engage in the actuality of the situation of the country and region you currently reside in. And if it's in the West, we're all pretty much in the same boat, sadly. And I am sad because I'm going to turn 50 soon. All this has happened on our watch. You know, our grandparents, my grandparents, fought for the freedoms we have, and a lot of their friends died for them. And what have we done with that? We have squandered a lot. And so it's on us. It's on us to be the solution, but first we have to acknowledge the problem. And that's the frustrating part. I wish I could say, like, if you go in this political direction, things will get better. There's going to be some challenging times coming, but this is going to be our conflict for our generation to manage, because if we don't, what are we leaving for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids? That's our generational issue now, isn't it?
Yeah. I've been saying this for a while now on social media and on my podcast as well. Look, what is my focus? Make it to the other side of the storms with my loved ones, with my children, and so on. That's it. How do you do that? That's up to you. I mean, I know what I'm going to do, but you know, everybody else, just you do you. And people are slow. You can see that it's happening. That people are starting to come to the same realization. A little bit late to the party, but still. I mean, I had one of my clients who's in his 60s talk to me like, imagine like this really, really, really horrible thing happens without saying, you know, Civil War, World War. So is it best to then own your house or actually still have a bank loan that you pay off? And I'm like, that we would never have discussed that like 5 or 10 years ago. But he's like, I don't know, like, what do you think? Because he knows, you know, we talk about this stuff. I was like, yeah. Okay, this is just people who have absolutely no interest in any of what we just talked about coming to this realization.
No, I'm saying here for me, there's in you know, so many people that were just 3 years ago would never be talking about this stuff, and now suddenly like quite heavily into it. You know, like serious discussions about exactly those kind of decisions. Yeah. You know,
and I mean, the war in Ukraine is going to come an end, temporarily or not. It's going to happen. The economical crisis is on its way. It's we could say it's already here, depending on where you live. You're already feeling it. We are going to get taxed to hell. There's going to be repression. There's going to be an authoritarian state. It's already in. I mean, in many cases, like you see in the UK, what's going on there is this. I mean, you liked a tweet that said something bad, and you got the police on your door, and you've got plenty of stuff going on there. And in other countries as well, it's not isolated incidents. A lot of things are actually happening. If you open your eyes and you look, you will see it. It's not a conspiracy theory. You're going to have to live through it. It's going to happen. And people have survived worse, much worse than that.
Yeah.
Sadly, not everybody's going to make it. That's also reality. I think a good mindset, and I think that's what you said, which I think is perhaps the most hopeful message, is like focus on your mindset right now. Your mindset is like, right?
Yeah, get your head in the game, quite simply. Get your head in the game. And then all the other info's out there from now on in, but you've got to get your head right.
All right. I'm watching the time. We're kind of screwed because I know you have to go.
Yeah, I have literally got to run. So if you want to stop the recording.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording.
And I'll say thanks everyone. Nice chatting with you again, as always.
I'll put the links in the show notes. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.